For joining us today for our March edition of our 2022 Connection Series. My name is Bruce Blakeman, and I'm the head of our public policy and issues practice here at Heart+Mind Strategies. We started these sessions just over 2 years ago as a way to collectively kind of hit the pause button and discuss the realities of human, market, and cultural trends going on all around us. Once again, today we have gathered for the same purpose, yet another major event happening that's shaping our future. If you're new to the sessions, thank you for joining us today. We appreciate it. And please engage with questions and commentary through the chat channel and even raising your hand through the Zoom channel if you wish. If you've been with us before, thank you so much for continuing this dialogue. We firmly believe that human connections further our ability to reach growth and progress each of our organizations seeks. Your joining us today strengthens those connections. I've been asked to provide a short staging for today's discussion on the war in Ukraine and its economic impact that's affecting all of us. This session is quite timely because the invasion started exactly 1 month from today. I spent several years working overseas for one of the largest food and ag companies in the world. So I'm going to use my experience in the food and ag space to set this discussion up today. Our speakers today are going to cover other areas for today's discussion. In the past several decades, we've seen unprecedented globalization and connection of global markets, regardless of whether it's agriculture, food, manufacturing, energy, services. We are all in a global market. Along with the globalization of supply chains and markets, we have seen globalization also of communications. As we all know, there are no boundaries to the internet and social media. What happens in the far ends of the planet today, if I can use an old adage, will be front page news later today, not tomorrow morning. While this interconnectivity and interconnectivity and creation of global supply chains has produced incredible global benefits, it also exposes companies to an incredible array of global risks. It also means we need to be nimble and be able to change ever faster to adapt to our changing world. A good example of the benefits we have realized from globalization is a dramatic lowering of global poverty and food insecurity. And for us in the developing world, we have the luxury of an incredible array of products and services at really affordable prices. To demonstrate this point, according to the World Bank, extreme global poverty, which is defined as $1.90 a day, has dropped from 42% of the global population in 1982, just 40 years ago, to 9% in 2018. This means billions of people have been risen out of poverty. We've been able to feed a growing world population on the same amount of cultivated land, basically about 100 million acres, just a little bit over 100 million acres worldwide, while the percentage of global incomes and what we spend on food has gone down dramatically, leaving more income to buy better food and educating our children. In America, for instance, the percentage of household income that is spent on food has dropped by 2/3 in the last 60 years, from 17% in 1960 to just 5% in 2019. Another benefit here in the US is we are able to buy just about any variety of fresh fruit or vegetable any time of the year, summer or winter. Of course, there are risks associated with globalization of production and markets. Long supply chains expose companies to the vagaries of weather, labor disputes, international shipping, currency fluctuations, NGO scrutiny on our supply chains, intellectual and property theft, corruption at the local level, and geopolitics. Wars being an extreme example of that last risk. Now, moving to our subject in today's discussion, the Russian invasion of Ukraine is causing enormous human suffering and loss of life. While the human costs are enormous, it is also causing supply chain disruptions in multiple supply chains, not only the devastation of the war, but also the impacts of the sanctions that the world is putting on Russia. And even further yet, in the ag space, countries are implementing export restrictions of that. So it's not just the Russian and the Ukrainian markets affected by this. And looking at key ag commodities from Ukraine and Russia, Russia is the #1 wheat exporter in the world at 18%. Ukraine's #5 at 8%. Ukraine is the #4 corn exporter at 12% of the global market. Russia's #7 at 2%. Ukraine is the #1 sunflower oil exporter at 29%. Russia's the #2 sunflower oil exporter at 22%. So together, they affect over half the global market in sunflower oil. And if you're a Unilever or a Nabisco or a Kraft or a McDonald's, this really affects the way what you're going to have to pay for your for these commodities, or you're going to have to change formulations. The effects of these supply chains being cut off will cause food prices to increase, and not just vegetable and oil. They will all be felt all across the entire supply chain, from baked goods to meat prices. One data point on price increases is the Wall Street Journal just reported this week that wheat prices have gone up 30% already since the invasion. A related issue is fertilizer production. And I think if you saw in today's Wall Street Journal, Russia is the #1 exporter of fertilizers at 13% of the global market. Ukraine is really not a significant exporter at 28, at just under 1%. But by restricting Russian exports, global prices will increase, costing farmers more, and it will eventually be felt by food processors and passed on to consumers. And really what it affects is smallholder farmers, where higher prices means they're going to be using less fertilizers when trying to find substitute for good fertilizers, which will result in lower yields, which essentially means less supply, which we all know means higher prices. And that will affect the poor most significantly. The disruption of supply and higher prices and export restrictions will ordinarily hurt nations in their efforts to feed their populations. Food insecurity globally will increase because of this war. And this does not include the personal effects of farmers in the Ukraine and Russia, who will both lose markets and the ability to cultivate their land that is part of a war zone. So this is just one example, if you will, of the global disruption as a result of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Our speakers today will discuss other effects and what the geopolitical landscape may look like going forward. They will also provide some over-the-horizon perspectives to give us some guidance on how to manage these risks that are resulting from this war in Central Europe.